The Galactic Council chamber hummed with the usual mixture of languages, pheromones, and electromagnetic frequencies that constituted civilized discourse among the 47 member species. Ambassador Chunwei sat in the human delegation section, her fingers drumming silently against her tablet as she watched the debate unfold. The topic, as it had been for the past 6 months, was humanity's excessive expansion rate. Counselor Vextheri, a towering crystalline being from the Andromedae Collective, gestured with one of his 4 arms toward the holographic star map floating in the chamber center. Red dots marked human colonies, spreading like a rash across what other species considered their traditional expansion zones. The humans have established 43 new settlements in the past standard year alone. Vextheri's voice resonated through the translation matrix. This violates the controlled expansion protocols established 3 centuries ago. They must be contained. A chorus of agreement rippled through the chamber. The Zalani delegation clicked their mandibles in approval, while the gaseous Nethys shifted their containment fields in patterns that indicated strong support. Chin noticed how the other species seemed to have coordinated their response. This wasn't a spontaneous debate, it was a planned intervention. Ambassador Chun called High Counselor Mordeth, the ancient reptilian who had presided over the council for nearly 2 centuries. The human delegation has remained notably silent during these proceedings. Does Earth have a response to these concerns? Chun stood, her movement fluid and controlled. Around the chamber, various species focused their attention on her, some with compound eyes, others with sensory organs humanity had barely learned to recognize. She had prepared for this moment for weeks, knowing it would come eventually. "Honored counselors," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the translation systems, "humanity has always operated within the bounds of council law. Our expansion follows established protocols for unclaimed systems. We have not encroached upon any species' sovereign territory or violated any treaties. But the rate of expansion," Vextheri interrupted, his crystalline structure flashing with agitation. "No species in council history has spread so aggressively. It demonstrates a concerning disregard for galactic stability." Chun smiled, though she knew most species in the chamber wouldn't recognize the expression. "Counselor Vextheri, perhaps the issue isn't our rate of expansion, but rather your species' rate of stagnation." The chamber erupted. Translation systems struggled to keep up with the cacophony of outraged responses. Several species began displaying threat postures, while others retreated into defensive positions. Chin remained standing, unmoved by the chaos she had unleashed. "Order!" Mordeth's voice boomed across the chamber. "Ambassador Chun, such inflammatory remarks are beneath the dignity of this body." "Are they?" Chin asked, her tone remaining conversational. "In the past century, the Zalani have established exactly 3 new colonies. The Andromedae Collective has founded 2. Most council species haven't left their home systems in generations. Meanwhile, you criticize humanity for actually exploring the galaxy." Elder Zithmora of the Zalani rose from her delegation, her insectoid frame quivering with barely contained fury. "Humans are reckless. They colonize planets without proper environmental studies, establish settlements in dangerous systems, and reproduce at rates that strain planetary resources. They're like a virus, consuming everything in their path. A virus that has contributed more scientific discoveries to the galactic database in 50 years than most species have in centuries," Chin replied smoothly. "A virus that has provided aid during 7 major disasters across council space. A virus that has never initiated conflict with another species." Yet, Vextheri interjected, "What happens when human space becomes so vast that conflict becomes inevitable? What happens when their endless hunger for new worlds brings them into contact with the void hunters, or worse, awakens something better left sleeping?" Chun paused, studying the faces and sensory organs directed at her. She could see the fear beneath the anger. These were old species, comfortable in their established territories, terrified of change. They had built their civilizations on careful stability, predictable growth, controlled progress. Humanity represented chaos, to them, an unpredictable variable that threatened their ordered galaxy. Counselors, she said finally, I believe I understand the real issue here. This isn't about expansion protocols or galactic stability. This is about fear. You're afraid that humanity will outgrow you, surpass you, make you irrelevant. So instead of rising to meet our example, you choose to shackle us to your level. The chamber fell silent. Even the background hum of life support systems seemed muted. Chun could feel the weight of hundreds of alien gazes upon her. Very well, she continued, reaching into her diplomatic case and withdrawing a sealed document. Since the Council seems determined to limit human potential, I have been authorized to present this formal notice. She placed the document on the central podium, where scanning beams immediately began analyzing its contents. Within moments, the translation appeared on screens throughout the chamber. Notice of withdrawal from the Galactic Council, effective immediately. The evacuation of human diplomatic staff from Council stations proceeded with characteristic human efficiency. Within 72 hours of Ambassador Chen's dramatic announcement, every human embassy, trade mission, and research facility in Council space had been quietly shuttered. Personnel gathered their belongings, encrypted their files, and departed without fanfare or protest. Dr. Sarah Okafor watched from the observation deck of the research station orbiting Vega Prime as the last human transport ship undocked. She had spent 8 years here, working alongside Zilani scientists to develop new terraforming techniques. The irony wasn't lost on her that her research focused on making dead worlds habitable, the very thing the Council now criticized humanity for doing too quickly. Dr. Okafor, a familiar clicking voice, said behind her. She turned to see Dr. Kithvara, her Zilani research partner, approaching with what appeared to be distress. The alien's compound eyes reflected the starlight in patterns Sarah had learned to read over the years. Kithvara, Sarah said warmly, though she kept her hands at her sides. Zilani didn't appreciate human gestures of affection. Is it true? Are all humans really leaving? The translation made Kithvara's voice sound mechanical, but Sarah could hear the underlying harmonics that indicated genuine concern. The diplomatic withdrawal is complete, yes. Research partnerships and trade agreements are being terminated as we speak. Sarah gestured toward the transport ship, now just a bright point among the stars. I'm on the last civilian evacuation. But our work, Kithvara clicked frantically. The atmospheric processors we've designed could save dying worlds across the galaxy. The Council will never approve implementation without human technical expertise. Sarah nodded sadly. It was true. Humanity had contributed disproportionately to Council scientific advancement, not because they were inherently superior, but because they approached problems differently. Where other species followed established protocols and tested theories for decades before implementation, humans were willing to experiment, to fail, to try again. I've uploaded all our research to the shared databases, Sarah said. Your people are brilliant, Kithvara. You'll continue the work. At 1/10 the pace, Kithvara replied bitterly. My people we don't think like humans. We calculate risks for years before acting. You taught me that sometimes the greatest risk is not taking any risk at all. Across Council space, similar conversations were taking place. Human traders packed up shops that had become cornerstone businesses in alien markets. Human explorers turned over detailed survey data for unexplored systems. Human mediators finished their final arbitration cases, leaving behind peaceful resolutions to conflicts that had festered for generations. On the Council homeworld, High Counselor Mordeth reviewed reports from across their territory. Every human facility had been vacated professionally, with all obligations fulfilled and all debts settled. They had even left maintenance manuals for equipment other species didn't fully understand. They're really gone, Counselor Zephitos observed, her aquatic form rippling with what Mordeth recognized as anxiety. No protests, no demands for reconsideration. They just left, as they should, Vextheri interjected, though his crystalline structure had lost some of its usual luminosity. The Council voted. Humanity was becoming a destabilizing force. Was it? More Death asked quietly. Or were we simply uncomfortable with their pace of progress? The question hung in the chamber like a toxic cloud. For 3 centuries, the Council had maintained peace through careful balance. Each species had their role, their territory, their place in the galactic hierarchy. Conflicts were resolved through committee. Expansion was planned in 5-decade increments. Scientific advancement proceeded through rigorous peer review that could take years to complete. Then, humanity had arrived barely 2 centuries ago. They had seemed primitive at first contact, having only recently developed faster-than-light travel. The Council had welcomed them as they welcomed all new species, expecting them to find their place in the established order. Instead, humanity had exploded across the galaxy like a shockwave. They didn't wait for committee approval to establish colonies. They didn't spend decades debating the ethics of terraforming. They saw an empty world, evaluated its potential, and made it home. Within a century, human space had grown from a single system to over 300 worlds. The galaxy was stable before they arrived, Vextheri said, though he sounded less certain than usual. Stable, yes, More Death agreed. But was it alive? When was the last time the Andromedae Collective discovered a new world? When did the Zalani last push beyond their traditional borders? When did any of us last feel the thrill of genuine exploration? Elder zit morashitid uncomfortably. Stability is not a weakness, High Counselor. It is wisdom earned through millennia of experience. Perhaps, More Death said, but wisdom without growth becomes stagnation. And stagnation eventually becomes death. Deep in the classified sections of the Council's central archives, automated systems began registering subtle changes. Human-designed software that had been quietly improving efficiency across dozens of databases suddenly stopped updating. Mining equipment in asteroid belts that had operated smoothly for decades began experiencing technical glitches. Communication networks that had benefited from human-developed protocols started showing increased lag times. Dr. Yithkael, the Council's chief archivist, noticed the changes first. As a member of the photosynthetic Verdani species, he processed information slowly but thoroughly. What he saw troubled him. The humans didn't just leave, he reported to his supervisor. They took their innovations with them. Software updates have ceased. Patent licenses have expired. Even the coffee machines in the diplomatic quarter have stopped working. It was a small thing, perhaps, but the coffee machines had been gathering places where representatives from different species met informally. The bitter human beverage had somehow become a neutral ground for negotiation. Without them, those casual conversations that often prevented larger conflicts simply stopped happening. Meanwhile, at the edge of Council space, automated monitoring stations detected something unprecedented. Human ships, hundreds of them, were moving beyond the galactic rim. They weren't stopping at the boundaries of known space. They weren't establishing colonies in the predictable expansion zones. They were leaving the galaxy entirely. Where are they going? Counselor Rethan asked during an emergency session. His energy-based physiology crackled with anxiety. Unknown, Admiral Vesrith reported. Her military bearing couldn't hide the confusion in her biorhythms. Long-range sensors show multiple human fleets heading toward the Andromeda Galaxy. Travel time, with their current technology, would be approximately 2,000 years. 2,000 years, More Death repeated slowly. They're planning for 20 generations of travel to reach another galaxy. The ambition of it, the sheer audacity. The madness of it, Vextheri corrected. No rational species would attempt such a journey. But, even as he said it, the crystalline being felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries. It took him a moment to recognize the emotion. Envy. When had his people last attempted something truly grand? When had they last reached beyond the comfortable boundaries of their established territory? The humans were gone. Council space was stable once again. So why did the galaxy suddenly feel so very small? 6 months after the human departure, the first crisis struck the trade routes between Zalani space and the Outer Rim colonies. Pirates had always been a problem in the region, but human patrol ships had kept them contained to a few isolated systems. Now, with those patrols gone, raider activity had increased by 300%. Captain Vorthe K of the Zalani merchant vessel Prosperity's wing sent his distress call as plasma fire tore through his ship's shields. The raiders had modified their vessels with some kind of new technology that made their weapons unusually effective against standard Council defenses. Council Defense Force. This is merchant vessel requesting immediate assistance. We are under attack by unknown hostiles in the Kethvar system. The response came back 12 hours later, long after Vorthe K and his crew had been captured and his cargo stolen. Acknowledge Prosperity's wing. Defense Fleet Epsilon will investigate. Estimated arrival time, 48 hours. By the time the defense fleet arrived, they found only wreckage and a data beacon. The message it contained was brief. Humans used to respond in 20 minutes. How are you enjoying your council protection now? High Counselor Mordeth read the incident report with growing unease. Similar attacks were being reported throughout former human patrol zones. The raiders seemed to know exactly where the gaps in council coverage existed. How many ships do we have available for anti-piracy operations? He asked Admiral Desrith during the emergency security briefing. The Admiral's species didn't have facial expressions, but her posture indicated discomfort. Approximately 200 vessels across all of Council space, High Counselor. Most are assigned to fixed defense positions around member worlds. And how many ships were the humans using for the same purpose? A long pause. Our intelligence estimates suggest approximately 800 vessels in active patrol status, with another 300 in rapid response reserve. Mordeth felt something cold settle in his stomach analog. 800 ships. For operations they were conducting voluntarily, without council oversight or compensation. The humans had always been enthusiastic about security operations, Vextheri commented from his position at the council table. His crystalline form seemed dimmer than usual. Perhaps overly so. Overly enthusiastic about protecting trade routes that benefit every council species. Mordeth's voice carried an edge that made several counselors shift uncomfortably. Perhaps we should examine exactly what else humans were doing overly enthusiastically. The audit results arrived 3 weeks later, and they were devastating. Humans had been involved in virtually every aspect of galactic civilization, often without the Council even realizing it. They had established emergency supply depots in 47 systems, maintained at their own expense. They had operated rescue services for ships in distress, charging nothing for the service. They had provided technical support for infrastructure projects, sharing innovations freely. Most shocking of all was the discovery of the Human Quiet Fleet, a collection of over 500 ships that had been operating in deep space, dealing with threats that never made it to Council attention. Spaceborne parasites that could devastate ecosystems. Rogue asteroids on collision courses with inhabited worlds. Ancient automated weapons left behind by long-extinct civilizations. They were protecting us, Dr. Yithkael reported to the assembled council. For decades, humans have been dealing with threats we never even knew existed. Look at this data from the Veil Nebula. 17 times in the past 10 years, human ships engaged and destroyed hostile artifacts that were drifting toward inhabited systems. Hostile artifacts? Counselor Zephitos asked, her aquatic form rippling with concern. Automated weapons platforms from the predecessor wars, apparently. Each one capable of sterilizing a planet. The humans found them, neutralized them, and disposed of the remains without ever informing the Council. Elder Zithmora clicked her mandibles in what could have been distress or disbelief. Why wouldn't they report such threats? The Council should have been informed. According to their classified files, they tried initially. The report was buried in committee for 8 months while we debated the proper protocols for dealing with ancient weapons. During that time, 3 more artifacts were detected. The humans decided it was faster to simply handle the problem themselves. The chamber fell silent except for the low hum of life support systems. Mordeth found himself wondering how many times the civilization had continued existing simply because some human captain had decided to quietly deal with a threat too urgent to wait for committee approval. But the real crisis came from an unexpected direction. The research station at Delta Pavonis, where crucial atmospheric restoration work was being conducted, sent out an emergency bulletin. Their primary processing facility was failing, and without it, the terraforming project that was creating a new homeworld for the refugee Kithra species would collapse. What's the nature of the malfunction? Chief Engineer Rothves asked during the emergency consultation. It's not a malfunction, came the reply from Dr. Kithvara, who had been appointed to lead the project after Dr. Okafor's departure. The primary atmospheric processor was designed by humans. It uses principles we don't fully understand. We've been operating it successfully for 2 years, but now it's requiring calibrations that our models can't predict. Surely human documentation exists. It does, but Kithvara's translation carried hints of embarrassment. The documentation assumes knowledge we don't possess. It references intuitive adjustments based on atmospheric feedback patterns and dynamic response to environmental resistance factors. These aren't standard engineering concepts. Rothves felt a chill of understanding. Humans didn't just design differently, they thought differently. Their technology wasn't just more advanced in some areas, it was based on fundamentally different approaches to problem solving. They built systems that could adapt and learn, that relied on continuous adjustment rather than fixed parameters. How long until the processor fails completely? 6 months. Maybe 8 if we're lucky. 6 months to save the Kithra species' only chance at a new homeworld. 6 months to figure out technology that humanity had developed over decades of experimentation. Technology they had shared freely, never imagining that their partners might someday need to operate it without them. The emergency session that followed was unlike any in Council history. Species that had barely spoken to each other in decades suddenly found themselves forced to cooperate. The Andromedae Collective's mathematical precision was needed to analyze the processor's algorithms. The Nethi's understanding of gas dynamics was crucial for atmospheric calculations. The Zalani's engineering skills were required for mechanical modifications. But even working together, they made little progress. The human approach to engineering was too alien, too unpredictable, where Council species designed for stability and predictability, humans designed for adaptability and growth. We need them back, Counselor Rethan finally said what everyone was thinking. Not just for this project, for all of it. The trade route security, the deep space monitoring, the technological innovation. We need humanity back in the Council. They rejected our authority, Vextheri pointed out, though his usual conviction was noticeably absent. They chose to leave rather than accept reasonable limitations on their expansion. Reasonable limitations, Murdet repeated slowly. Tell me, Counselor Vextheri, when was the last time your species established a new colony? 37 years ago, after proper environmental assessment, cultural impact studies, and resource allocation planning. And how long did that process take? 14 years. Standard protocol requires 14 years, more death interrupted. Humans would have surveyed, terraformed, and colonized a dozen worlds in that time. Perhaps the problem isn't that they move too fast. Perhaps the problem is that we move too slowly. But as the Council debated and committees formed to study the crisis, reports continued to arrive from the edge of known space. Human ships, visible on long-range sensors, continuing their impossible journey toward another galaxy. They weren't coming back. They had meant what they said about leaving quietly. And for the first time in centuries, the galaxy felt truly empty. 2 years after humanity's quiet departure, the galaxy began to understand the true scope of what they had lost. The Kithara terraforming project had failed spectacularly, leaving an entire species without a homeworld and scattered across refugee camps throughout Council space. The atmospheric processor had collapsed exactly as predicted, taking with it the hopes of 3 billion displaced beings. But that was only the beginning. The Void Hunter incursion started as a routine sensor reading from the automated listening posts at the Galactic Edge. Ancient machines, left behind by civilization that had vanished millions of years ago, suddenly awakening and beginning their slow march toward inhabited space. Each hunter was the size of a small moon, equipped with weapons technology that could crack planets and shielding that absorbed energy attacks. How many? High Counselor Mordeth asked Admiral Vezrith, though he already dreaded the answer. Current count shows 17 active hunters, with more awakening each day. Their trajectory will bring them into contact with the Outer Rim colonies in approximately 8 months. What do our defense simulations show? The Admiral's silence stretched for nearly a minute. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of impending catastrophe. High Counselor, our combined fleet has a 13% probability of stopping even a single Void Hunter. Against 17, she didn't need to finish. Everyone in the chamber understood. The Council's military philosophy had always focused on deterrence and defense. Their ships were designed to protect fixed positions, not to conduct aggressive operations against overwhelming force. They had relied on diplomacy, trade agreements, and mutual cooperation to maintain peace. The Void Hunters didn't negotiate. What about the weapons platforms the humans destroyed in the Veil Nebula? Counselor Zephitos asked desperately. Could we reverse engineer that technology? We have the wreckage, Dr. Yithkael reported. But the humans were thorough in their disposal methods. They didn't just disable the weapons, they completely melted the core control systems. Apparently, they were concerned about the technology falling into the wrong hands. Their caution may have doomed us all, Vextheri observed, his crystalline structure flickering with barely controlled panic. No, Mordeth said quietly. Our pride doomed us all. The evacuation orders went out the next day. 73 Outer Rim colonies, representing nearly 200 million beings, received instructions to abandon their worlds and retreat to the inner systems. It was the largest refugee crisis in galactic history, and the Council was utterly unprepared to handle it. Ships designed for cargo transport were hastily converted for passenger service. Space stations that had never housed more than a few thousand beings suddenly found themselves sheltering tens of thousands. Food distribution networks, already strained by the loss of human agricultural innovations, began to collapse under the additional burden. On the Zalani homeworld, riots broke out in the refugee camps. The displaced beings from different species couldn't coexist in the hastily constructed facilities. Without human mediators, who had somehow always managed to find common ground between vastly different cultures, the camps descended into chaos. The humans would have known what to do, Dr. Kithvara observed during one particularly violent confrontation. She had been working 18-hour days trying to coordinate the scientific response to the crisis, but without human technological insights, progress was minimal. The humans aren't here, Elder Zithmora replied sharply. We must find our own solutions. With what? Our outdated defensive strategies? Our committee-based decision-making? The first Void Hunter will reach the Kepler colony in 6 months, and we're still debating whether to evacuate or attempt a defense. The harsh truth was that Council civilization had become dependent on human innovation without realizing it. Not just their technology, but their approach to problems. Humans didn't form committees to deal with crises. They acted, adapted, and accepted that some solutions would fail spectacularly. Other Council species had learned to rely on that human willingness to take risks, to try the impossible, to succeed where careful planning said success was unlikely. Meanwhile, deep in the classified archives, autonomous systems began sending out desperate signals. Automated distress beacons that humans had installed throughout Council space, designed to activate only in case of existential threats to galactic civilization. The signals were broadcast on frequencies that only human ships could receive, carrying detailed information about the Void Hunter threat and the Council's inability to respond effectively. But the nearest human colonies were now more than 300 light-years away, at the very edge of detection range. Even if they received the signals, even if they care enough to respond, it would take months for human ships to return. And the Void Hunters would arrive in 6 months. The first sign that humanity might have received the distress signals came from an unexpected source. Trading vessels from the independent merchant guilds, beings who operated outside council jurisdiction, began reporting strange encounters in the deep void between star systems. Ships that appeared on sensors for brief moments before vanishing again. Energy signatures that matched human faster-than-light drives, but moving in patterns that suggested surveillance rather than travel. "Someone is watching us," Captain Dorthael of the merchant vessel Final Prophet reported during his debriefing at the trade station orbiting New Geneva. "My engineer swears he detected human ship signatures in 3 different systems, but whenever we adjusted course to investigate, they were gone." Similar reports came in from across the evacuation routes. Human ships, or something very much like them, observing the massive refugee movement from a distance. Never approaching close enough for contact, never interfering with council operations, but always watching. "They know," More Death said during an emergency session. "Somehow, humanity knows about the crisis." "Of course they know," Vextheri replied bitterly. "They probably planned this. Drive us to the point of collapse, then return as saviors to impose their will on the galaxy." "Is that really what you believe?" More Death asked. "After 2 years of watching our civilization crumble without their support, do you honestly think humans orchestrated this crisis?" Vextheri's crystalline structure dimmed. "No, but it doesn't matter. Even if they return, why should they help us? We drove them away. We told them they were dangerous, that their expansion was reckless, that their methods were flawed. Why would they risk their ships and crews to save species that rejected them?" The question hung in the chamber like a death sentence, because that was exactly what the situation required. The Council needed humanity to risk everything to save civilizations that had voted to remove them from galactic society. They needed humans to behave exactly like the reckless, heroic, impossible species they had always been. They needed humans to be human. 5 months before the first Void Hunter would reach inhabited space, the Council made a decision that would have been unthinkable just years earlier. They authorized Admiral Vezrith to take a small diplomatic vessel beyond Council boundaries, into the empty space where human ships had been detected, carrying the most complete apology in galactic history, and a desperate plea for help from the species they had driven away. Admiral Vezrith's diplomatic vessel Reconciliation had been traveling through the void for 18 days when a human fleet finally revealed itself. One moment her sensors showed empty space. The next moment, 237 vessels materialized around her ship in perfect formation. No alarms sounded, no weapons locked onto her vessel. The humans had simply chosen to become visible. The lead ship was massive, easily 3 times the size of anything in the Council fleet. Its hull bore scars that spoke of battles fought in the deep void, places where no Council vessel had ever traveled. When the communication came through, the voice was familiar. "Admiral Vezrith, this is Admiral Sarah Chun, commanding the human deep space fleet. Permission to come aboard." Vezrith felt something she rarely experienced, genuine surprise. "Admiral Chun? I thought Ambassador Chen's sister, Dr. Chen Wei, had been the diplomatic representative." "That was my younger sister. I've been commanding deep space operations since before the diplomatic incidents began." The human's voice carried an undertone that Vezrith's species was uniquely adapted to detect, profound sadness mixed with determination. "We've been monitoring the situation in Council space. We know about the Void Hunters." 20 minutes later, Admiral Chun materialized on the bridge of the Reconciliation via transport beam, a technology that still amazed Council engineers. She was taller than her sister, with gray threading through her black hair and scars that spoke of personal combat experience. Her uniform bore insignia that Vezrith didn't recognize, symbols that suggested rank structures the Council had never seen. "Admiral Chun, I bring formal authorization from the Galactic Council to negotiate." "Stop." Chen's voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. "Before we begin, you need to understand something. The humans who left Council space 2 years ago, they represented maybe 15% of our total population. The rest of us were already out here, in the deep void, dealing with threats you've never imagined. She gestured, and a holographic display appeared showing the galaxy from a perspective Ezrith had never seen. Beyond the spiral arms, in the dark space between galaxies, thousands of tiny lights indicated human outposts, research stations, and military installations. We've been fighting the Void Hunters for 30 years, Chun continued. Not the ones currently heading toward Council space, those are just scouts. We've been battling the main swarm in the intergalactic void, preventing them from reaching the galaxy at all. Every year, we destroy hundreds of them. Every year, more arrive from whatever dead civilization originally created them. The display zoomed in, showing massive space battles between human fleets and mechanical monstrosities the size of small moons. Ezrith watched in horror as human ships, some of them clearly damaged beyond any hope of survival, rammed themselves into Void Hunter cores to detonate nuclear charges. "My God," she whispered. "Why didn't you tell the Council?" "We tried. Do you remember the report about theoretical extragalactic threats that my sister submitted 4 years ago? The one that your science committee determined was speculative and not requiring immediate attention?" Ezrith felt her respiratory system seize. She remembered that report. She had been part of the committee that buried it in bureaucratic procedures. "You were trying to warn us. We were trying to prepare you. But the Council decided that humanity was too aggressive, too unpredictable, too dangerous to be trusted with information about galactic-level threats." Chin's expression remained neutral, but her words carried the weight of bitter experience. "So we handled it ourselves. And now 17 scouts have broken through our outer perimeter while we were dealing with a major swarm incursion near the Magellanic Clouds. They're heading for Council space, and our deep space fleets are too far away to intercept them in time." Admiral Chun activated another section of the display, showing human fleet positions throughout the galaxy. Most were impossibly far from Council territory, engaged in battles that dwarfed anything in recorded history. The few fleets close enough to help were outnumbered and outgunned. "But you came anyway," Ezrith observed. "Of course we came. Despite everything, Council species are still people. You don't let people die because they made bad political decisions." The simplicity of the statement hit Ezrith like a physical blow. Humans had spent decades protecting a galaxy that had ultimately rejected them. And when that galaxy faced extinction, their immediate response was to help. Not to negotiate favorable terms, not to extract concessions, but simply to help because it was the right thing to do. "What do you need from us?" she asked. "Nothing," Chin replied. "This is going to be entirely a human operation. We're evacuating our deep space research stations and pulling back every ship we can spare. Total commitment, everything we have within 6 months travel time of Council space." "How many ships?" 412 combat vessels, plus support craft. "It won't be enough to stop all 17 hunters, but it might be enough to stop most of them." Ezrith processed the numbers with growing horror. The humans were committing more than twice the Council's entire military to a battle they couldn't win, to protect species that had driven them away. "What can we do to help?" "Keep your people out of our way," Chin said bluntly. "Council ships aren't equipped for this kind of warfare. Your crews aren't trained for it. The best thing you can do is complete the evacuation of the threatened systems and let us handle the hunters. That's it. After everything, you just want us to stand aside." Chin was quiet for a long moment, staring at the tactical display. "Admiral Ezrith, in the past 2 years, we've lost 43 ships and over 8,000 crew members fighting threats that Council space never knew existed. We've developed weapons technology that makes your most advanced systems look like toys. We've learned to think in terms of sacrifice that would horrify your species." She turned to face Ezrith directly. "You want to know what you can do? When this is over, when we've bled ourselves dry to save your civilizations, learn from it. Stop thinking in terms of committees and protocols and 5-decade plans. The galaxy is a dangerous place, and it's getting more dangerous every year. If you want to survive, you need to become the kind of species that can adapt, that can innovate, that can make hard decisions quickly. You want us to become more like humans." I want you to become more like yourselves, but better. Every species has strengths. The Andromedae mathematical precision, Zalani engineering expertise, Nethes atmospheric manipulation, your strategic thinking. But you've let bureaucracy and fear turn those strengths into weaknesses. Shun gestured, and the display changed to show the approaching Void Hunters, now just 4 months from the first inhabited systems. We'll stop as many as we can, but if even one gets through, it can sterilize multiple worlds before you could organize a response. You need to be ready. 3 weeks later, the human fleet engaged the Void Hunters in the empty space between star systems. The battle lasted 6 hours and cost humanity 137 ships. When it was over, 16 of the 17 hunters had been destroyed. The last one, damaged but still functional, continued toward Council space. Admiral Chin's final transmission was broadcast on all Council frequencies. One hunter remaining, heading for the Kepler system. We've damaged its shielding and primary weapons, but it's still capable of planetary bombardment. Our remaining ships are too damaged to pursue. You have 48 hours to evacuate Kepler colony or find a way to stop it yourselves. For the first time in Council history, every species dropped their procedural protocols. Zalani engineers worked around the clock to retrofit mining charges into makeshift weapons. Andromedae mathematicians calculated firing solutions in real time. Nethes provided atmospheric specialists for evacuation efforts. Admiral Vesrith herself led a hastily assembled fleet of every available ship toward Kepler, knowing they would probably all die, but determined to try. The battle for Kepler was brief and desperate. Council ships, designed for patrol and defense, threw themselves at a mechanical monster that had been built to end civilizations. Most were destroyed in the first exchange of fire, but the few survivors, working together in ways the Council had never managed before, found the weak points Chin's fleet had created and exploited them with desperate courage. When the Void Hunter finally died, exploding a flash that briefly outshone Kepler's sun, only 3 Council ships remained functional. But Kepler colony survived. 6 months later, Admiral Chun returned to Council space with a formal proposal. Not a request to rejoin the Council, but an offer of alliance. Humanity would continue to handle deep space threats and galactic defense. In exchange, the Council would handle local governance and provide the diplomatic stability that their diverse species were uniquely suited to maintain. Partnership, she explained to the assembled representatives, not integration. We do what we do best. You do what you do best. High Councilor Mordeth, older and grayer than he had been 2 years earlier, stood to address the chamber. The Council accepts humanity's proposal with gratitude. But I have one question, Admiral. Why? After everything we put you through, why are you still willing to protect us? Chin smiled for the first time since arriving. Because, Counselor, somebody has to. And humans have always been good at doing impossible things for people who need help. The vote was unanimous. Humanity had left quietly when the Council drove them away. They returned quietly when the galaxy needed them most. And, in the end, everyone learned that sometimes the most dangerous species in the galaxy is also the one you most want on your side.